Hello, I'm John David Ebert, and welcome to the sixth lecture on understanding contemporary art. And in this class, we will be looking at the oeuvre of Mark Rothko, at least the first half of it. Now, it becomes an interesting fact when we consider that in 1945, two atom bombs were dropped, one on Hiroshima, one on Nagasaki, and that the flash of those atom bombs not only disintegrated the forms of those two cities and flattened them, thereby ending World War II with a finale. But I think that it can hardly be an accident that at precisely the same time in the realm of art, right about 1947 was when, as we have seen, Jackson Pollock was dissolving form into the drip paintings that he discovered out at Fireplace Road in 1947. But also Mark Rothko at about the same time in New York City was discovering with his multiforms in 1946 down to about 1949, he was dissolving all of the iconotypes of his earlier art, which had been based for the most part on pastiches of artists like Picasso and Mata and Miro, began to dissolve. And both artists simultaneously come up with a new art form that shifts us out of modernism and enters into the epoch of contemporary art by wiping the walls of being clean, as it were. And in this case, we can call it the walls of being, or we can call it the modernist hypersphere that we talked about before. But in either event, in either case, basically what is going to happen, what we'll see happen in the works of Rothko here, as we've already seen in Pollock, is that both artists wipe out the iconotypes of the modernist world. And those iconotypes are essentially the Jungian myth forms on the one hand, and on the other, the geometrical forms that have structured a great deal of modernism, into the creation of a single macrosphere, a hypersphere, that everyone who participated in modernism, for the most part, was practicing working out. So they're all sort of on the same page within the same hypersphere. But now with the meltdown and liquefaction of these forms, we can actually chart them by looking at Mark Rothko's work, which I want to get right into. In this first image, we can chart this meltdown. This is 1944. This is Mark Rothko's A Slow Swirl at the Edge of the Sea. And as you can see here in this painting, it is very much derivative of Miro and Mata. These are sort of Jungian archetypal figures, myth forms of the collective unconscious out at the edge of the ocean, which is always the source. The sea is the source for mythic forms and images. And the title of this next image from 1945 is called Archaic Idol, which is, these are classic modernist art forms. Rothko is doing nothing at this point to move art forward. He's simply swimming around recycling the archetypes of Paris, basically, of modernist art. But long about this time, already here with this painting in 1945, which is untitled, and a lot of Rothko's paintings are untitled, we can start to see the liquefaction of these forms. They begin to melt down here. They begin to take on a kind of rubbery, liquid, melting candle quality to them that indicates that they are sort of melting off the walls of being. They're actually sliding down and liquefying off the walls of the macrosphere. And in the multiforms that he comes up with, this one is from 1948, but they all start coming in around 46 and 47. And they're called multiforms. And in these multiforms, we can actually see the modernist macrosphere itself dissolving. It's falling apart and coming to pieces. And what we're going to see is a shift from the world of texts and signifiers to the world of pure self-luminous surfaces. So in order to do that, Rothko first has to wipe the slate clean, which is a phrase that he used. And he's doing that in his artwork here. And this next painting is untitled, 1948, and we can see the meltdown taking place. And not only are the forms melting down, but they are beginning to sift and organize and shift into rectilinear, into a more ordered universe of rectilinear squares and diagrams, diagrammatic images that confer a kind of order on the prima materia, the sort of chaos of these melting forms. A new cosmos is coming into being from out of the meltdown of modernist art here. This is another untitled from 1948 where we can start to see that he's bringing order into the chaos of this cosmos now. We're beginning to see rectilinearity and we're beginning to see colors and forms sift and drift and sort themselves out into these little tiny islands, these little squares, which I would tend to regard, or we might call, elementary units of being. Being now, and Heidegger used the term being simply to designate how a culture understands how anything at all is understood. Anything that is understood presupposes a certain epochal understanding of being that everyone in that epoch agrees upon. For example, the understanding of being in the metaphysical age of perspectival art that we've already looked at from, let's say, the Italian Renaissance artists all the way down to Manet, was a realm of absolute subjects beholding absolute objects. So the understanding of being there was absolute objectivity, pure subjects beholding pure objects. That dissolved into the modernist world, where being began to shift there. Heidegger said that it shifted into enframing, on the one hand, technological enframing, and he missed modernist art. He didn't understand it. He, like Oswald Spengler, saw it as a complete degradation where he saw these artists simply producing objects that were divorced from being and simply lost touch with being. And for Heidegger, when an object loses touch with being, it becomes merely an object. But he didn't understand modernist art. But now here I think we're moving into an epoch of a new sort of post-World War II, postmodernist understanding of being. And Rothko, rather, in 1949, with this, here's another painting, another untitled. This is 1949, where we can begin to see the cosmos now that he is bringing into being. It's a world of self-luminous elementary units of being, squares that radiate their own internal energy. And it's very much as though, like with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the light pulse, the amount of radiation that dissolves the forms, releases all that light and radiation. Same thing here with Rothko. The dissolution of the modernist forms begins to unleash a universe, a hitherto unsuspected universe of light, of self-luminous, spiritual light energies. And this is a very spiritual world that Rothko is moving into here. It's a world, in a sense, without form, or at least with a minimum of form, but with a maximum of luminosity and radiance. This is another one. This is White Center from 1950. Very beautiful, very spiritually radiant. And again, this epoch typifies, or this period for Rothko typifies what the philosopher Wilhelm Flusser called the shift from texts to surfaces. Rothko is liquefying all the signifiers of art and leaving behind simply these self-luminous surfaces, elementary units of being that are organizing spiritual units of energy, all to themselves and on their own. There's another one from this period. This is number 12 from 1951, and it's very radiant. And we can start to begin to see here, here's another one untitled from 1951. We can start to begin to see here in these paintings that Rothko is also being very prescient about the understanding of being that is coming into being with the discovery of the electronics industry. I think artists are always a generation or two ahead. They anticipate coming developments, just as philosophers tend to be a generation or two behind. They anticipate coming developments in the culture, ontological shiftings and metaphysical rumblings. They're always the first. They act, as McLuhan said, as a distant early warning system in a culture, and they're always able to anticipate what's coming up ahead. And I think Rothko does this brilliantly here. Here's the last Rothko that I want to show in this series, Violet, Green, and Red from 1951. And this one I think is very self-luminous and looks very much like an electronic computer screen. And I think that Rothko is already prescient. He's already for understanding, the understanding of being, the post-World War II understanding of being as a realm of self-luminous rectangles. We're surrounded with video screens and luminous surfaces everywhere we go now. We're so immersed in it that we're like fish in proverbial water who can't tell that they're in water. We're surrounded in it. But for Rothko, this was a strange new world that he was entering into, and I think that these paintings are very prescient of this. What happens with Rothko, I think there's a certain parallel to what happened with the medieval macrosphere when it collapsed and shattered. And here is Jean Fouquet's on the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the faithful from 1452, where the macrosphere there was a very self-enclosed and reassuring world where God could send angels down into the luminous macrosphere protecting the earth to chase off devils and demons. And the metaphysical age was all about immunizing the psyche against attacks by invoking these angelic presences and powers. Here's the image of the earth from the Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch in around 1500 on the outer panels that show the earth, how it was pictured inside of this macrosphere, very womb-like, in a very uteromorphic state, very womb-like, very self-enclosed. But when that universe shattered with Copernicus and with the discovery of the new Copernican cosmology that displaced the Ptolemaic, infinite space now became the revelation. And here we see, and the Dutch were really the first to paint this new shifting out of the enclosure of this macrosphere into the luminous world of light here, which we see with Van Goyen in 1652, his painting of an estuary. The the Dutch really did discover infinite space. I mean, there it is, and it's a realm of light that suddenly expands, a realm of light and space that expands and opens up the very moment that the protective uterine medieval macrosphere collapses. Here's another one. This is Rijsdal, a view of Haarlem, and there again is this Dutch expansion of space. And so it is very much something very similar is happening in Rothko when he moves beyond the enclosure of the modernist hypersphere, melts it down, and then moves into a new cosmology of light and self-luminous surfaces that is built up out of elementary units of being and is already on the way toward a sort of foreshadowing of the electronic Umwelt, the electronic world ground that is beginning to configure. And so next we'll look at the second half of Rothko's Urv and see what happens.